Now, what we started talking about last week was like this mindset idea and the shift. And for those of us who are followers of Jesus, we said this, like many people are moving in this sort of scarcity mindset that's like continuing on in a circle that doesn't end. And what we started talking about last week is this, like at the end of the day, if you believe that Jesus is who he said that he is, and he's gonna do the things that he said he was gonna do, followers of Jesus don't have to be worried about scarcity. You're just not worried about scarcity. Now, it's not that you don't wanna be involved in making things better, and it's not that you're not a realist in some of these things, but what is fascinating for followers of Jesus is we go, hey, at the end of the day, we trust in God and who he said that he is and what he's gonna do, and we trust that we don't have to live in a mindset of scarcity, but we get to live with abundance, right? Now, if you were to ask my kids, I'm the richest person on the planet. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's a little bit of this where like, they just assume that we can get anything. And so the other day, one of our kids asked me, just because they don't even know to not ask this, they said, hey, Dad, when I get my first car, and I'm like, yeah, when you're 36, but when you get your first car, can I have multiple versions of like a Tesla? And they had the exact model because he had looked at that. Now, I'm all about Teslas. I love it. But my 16-year-old son isn't getting 4 of them. You know what I mean? Like that's not going to happen, right? And there's a piece of this where I love that he's just, it's not even just innocence. He's just confident that I could do pretty much anything when it comes to that. Now, am I? I'm not, right? But he's just confident that I could. Now, some of you, when you first started out in your faith journey with Jesus, like there's a piece of this where you just assumed when God said that he could do something that he could do it for you. Do you know what I'm talking about? Like you just assumed when you were younger that it wasn't scarce, that there was abundance, and that he could show up on your behalf. And then for many people, like some people call it maturity, and sometimes it is, and sometimes it's not. But there's a version of this where you move forward in your life and you go, I prayed for this thing and it didn't happen. And so God must not, and then you fill in whatever the blank is. And you begin to move into this like, I don't know if he can, or I don't know if he will, or maybe he can, but he doesn't seem like he will do it for me. And all of a sudden we get into these sort of mindsets. And here's what happens for a lot of us, depending on your personality type too. Some of us are more prone to this. I'm wildly prone to this. But if it doesn't feel like it's going my way, what I want to do is I want to take the reins of whatever it is that doesn't feel like going my way. And whether God's going to get involved or not, I'm going to make sure to be involved to make it go the way I think it should go. And what that is so fascinating is like that is a superpower sometimes. And then sometimes what it is it's just me living in a mindset where I'm just kind of having a scarcity mindset in my life. And so what we said last week is the foundational thing for so much of what we talk about when it comes to following Jesus. And it's a quote by Dr. Charles Stanley. I always like to say the Dr. Charles Stanley because if we have a pope in the family, it would be Dr. Charles Stanley. He says that, he says, obey God and leave all the consequences to him. This is what we said last week, that the biggest way you get out of whatever that cycle is of your own life trying to control all of your life, which is not the way of Jesus, is for you to go, hey, I'm going to listen to what God has to say to me, and then I am going to respond to what he has to say to me, no matter what. Now, this sounds really good when you were in church, right? So this is one of those things that very few followers of Jesus disagree with me. In the seats, after we sing I Speak Jesus, everything's going well, you feel good, you know what I'm saying? And then on Tuesday happens, and you're like, he didn't, or he isn't, or he won't. And all of a sudden we drift into whatever the scarcity thing is. And here's how you know, I think, if you are more confident on a daily basis on you rather than God. And that's in the moment when you rely on yourself first, when something happens in your life rather than going to him first, right? When things happen that you feel like are out of your control, or maybe they're not out of your control. Maybe you were the one who kicked the ball and then it started going and you're like, whoopsie, you can't quite grab it back and it's rolling. Maybe your first thing isn't to pause and go, Father, I need your help. Maybe your first thing is to go, I'm gonna chase after the ball. And some of you have been chasing after the ball since you were like 11 years old and you just never caught it. And you're a little bit tired because everything that you've mustered up into you to solve all of the problems for you comes back to your own ability and your own capacity. You pray for things when it feels like it really matters, but at the end of the day, there's a part of you that goes, I am a little bit distant from the involvement of God in my life on a consistent basis. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about this. And we're going to talk about one of the areas that I think for those of us who are followers of Jesus, that this is the hardest area for many of us to do. And we'll talk about why here in a second. For those of you who are not followers of Jesus, I'm going to give you a quick disclaimer after I show you the word, right? The word that we're going to talk about today is generosity, which is one of the spaces that I think we feel the most scarce / abundant sort of battle in our minds. So I'm gonna say three things as a caveat. Can I say three things as a caveat? Is that okay? Just knowing our church. So about a third of you are not followers of Jesus, which I love. I'm so glad you're here. That's why we moved here. So that's fantastic. A third of you would probably say some version of I'm a follower of Jesus, and also I'm kind of there. I don't know that I'm fully there, but I believe that Jesus died on the cross and rose from the dead. But in terms of giving Jesus your whole life, you would probably say I've given him parts of it, but I haven't given him all of it. And some of you are just all in, let's go. Jesus spoke to you 7 times this morning. Here we go. You know what I mean? You're ready to go. And I would say this, that's what I want to be, right? That's what I want to be every day. That's what I want to be every day. So that's kind of roughly about the breakdown of our church. So if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, or even if you're in the second camp, and maybe you've experienced church hurt, or a guy put on a microphone, and he said some of the things that I'm going to say today, and it felt manipulative, so I'm just going to give you the caveat out the gate. When pastors talk about generosity, the assumption, and I'll just be really honest, is that there's generally an ulterior motive, because the vast majority of things that you hear, at least on Twitter and on social media, and maybe even experiences that you've had, tells you that when pastors talk about money, all they want is all my money. So I get that, and then what are they doing with it? And there's all that stuff. So I want to say I get all of that. And so what I'm going to ask you to do today for the next few minutes, and I know this is hard, and then after you leave, you can totally be mad about it and tweet at me or whatever. Nobody tweets in this room to me, but that's great. I haven't tweeted in 11 years. So anyway, so there's a little bit of that. But here's what I'm going to ask you to do. For the next few minutes, I don't want you to suspend your belief on anything that you hold in those ways. What I would love for you to do for the next few minutes is to suspend, at least for the next 20, 30 minutes, suspend your, suspicion isn't the word, but I'd love for you to give me the benefit of the doubt for the next few minutes. And at the end of it, you can go, well, I don't, and then you're out, and that's fine. For the next few minutes, I want you to look at something that I think matters so deeply for you. And I said this in week 1, and I said this. Many people who are followers of Jesus, including me at different points in my life, have done a version of, God, you get all of me, and you get this, and simultaneously hold something back here. And for many people, the thing they're holding back here is financial resources that they don't trust God with, right? So what we're going to do for the next few minutes is we're going to talk about generosity. We're going to talk about a Christian view of generosity. And if you're not a follower of Jesus in the room, I'm just going to say this. What I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is true for people that are followers of Jesus, but principally, it's true for all people. So the principle that we're going to talk about for the next few minutes is one of these principles, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, it releases your heart in a way that nothing else does and nothing else will. So you get to the end of this and disagree with everything I'm about to say, totally get it. I totally get it. You just email me at paige.hayes@nouveauchurch.org. We'll do that. See, she was on stage earlier, so I'll do that. No, I'm just kidding. She's not even in the room, so I can do that. That's great. But I would say this. For the next few minutes, I'm going to ask you to suspend whatever that is, at least for a few minutes, and then you can come back to it if you want to at the end. But the area of the Bible that we're going to talk about today is, specifically speaking, we're going to be speaking about the Israelites. And if you grew up around church, you probably were in church to the point where somebody put a flannel graph sort of thing, which I love, by the way. I grew up in that world and they were telling your story and Moses and leading people out of slavery, and all of a sudden he gets up there and you know what I'm talking about? And the waters part, which is fascinating. Again, I'm sort of a literalist and sort of looking at how does that work? I love the science behind it. Something happened miraculous, and God freed a group of people, and they were headed to wherever God promised them to go, right? In the most simplest version of this, the Israelites being, in a lot of ways, God's people at this time period going look, we're going to follow you, and they follow, out, and then all of a sudden they head out, and they're going to the promised land, and as they're going to the promised land, it's like God had promised them that there was something waiting for them as they go. Now, here's the fascinating part about this. If you've never read Exodus, I think Exodus is one of the most fascinating areas of the Bible, because you get the most probably poignant story of a group of people who are experiencing suffering. God frees them in a lot of ways from that suffering, leads them into a weird, wild, uncertain, unknown thing, and just says, hey, I want you to come trust me. And then they trust him for 5 minutes and then stop. And then they trust him for 5 minutes and then they stop. And they kind of go back and forth in these fascinating ways. In fact, what we're going to look at today is one of the leaders that they're going after is going we're going this way, God spoke to us, we're moving forward. And then they're nah, we want to stone you because I think you're wrong. Let's go back to where we came from because it felt safer, right? And so the area that we're going to look at today in the text is one of these fascinating things. We're going to look at 2 things, but the initial part of this, God calls them out and does miraculous things over and over and over again for them. And then as they're going out, God, in the most tangible way possible, shows up to lead them. And you get this like really like interesting and fascinating way that this happens. I want to read you this verse. This is in Exodus. And here's what it says in terms of the way that God was leading them. It says, by day the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or by night. And neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people. Now, this is what's so fascinating. I think this would be so great. If I had to pick, this would be the way that God would speak to me right now. I think I love a cloud in front of me or fire. That would be fantastic. Like even just to get home. Like I still use Waze to get home. You know what I'm talking about? Like there's a little bit of this where I would love to be led with that kind of clarity. Now, what's interesting though about many of us, and I think the way that we experience God is oftentimes God is leading us in ways and we're just not listening. That God is nudging you in your heart sometimes in ways you just put it down as if it's like bad pizza that you don't really listen to. But it's not that he's not speaking sometimes. Sometimes he is. And we're just not watching or we're not listening. And this is what we talked about last week is like, God, what do you want to do? What do you want to do in my life? What do you want to do for me before I go into this meeting? What do you want to do before I head into this board thing? What do you want to do for me as I head into my job or before I get home or when I'm with my kids? What do you want to do in me? And those are the same questions that we ask about our financial resources too. The difference about this is rarely do people initially love the answer that God speaks to them when it comes to this part of their life because it feels like a loss, and it's not. When it comes to resources that God given us, and we'll talk about this more in a few minutes, but ultimately, if we believe that all of it is his, then he has gifted us resources to steward and not own. And he directs us with what we do with our life. And some of you, including me, go, wait a minute, I worked for it, that's mine. But Christianity has never, ever, ever, throughout the New Testament, the early church fathers, throughout Christian history, has never, ever taught that what you made on your own was fully and finally yours. It's always taught that God stewards his resources to where he wants to steward his resources. And he's gifted you in the ways that he's gifted you. And sure, you work hard and sure, you do extraordinary things. But God is leading you somewhere and he is funneling whatever resources he's given to you to be a steward of. But you are not an owner of. And that's different. Now, when you think about this cloud thing, I think it's so fascinating. There's a lot of areas of my life I want a very clear sign that God is leading me to do something. Financial stuff is just not one of those things typically, right? The real honest truth about this is I would love for God to lead me on everything I should and should not say to my kids, or how I should navigate our home life. Or I would love for him to lead us exactly to the next building that we're heading to now. That would be fantastic. You know what I mean? Everybody on the setup team said, oh, that's hilarious. Oh, stop it. You're good. Yeah. But there's a piece of this where you go like, there's also areas, I don't know if I want to know what he says. Or I don't know for sure if I want to know where he's leading me. And so if you fast forward throughout Exodus, you get to Numbers and you kind of see what's going on and they're heading to the promised land. So they get kind of on the edges of this or on the verge of this. And the leader of this whole group of people is going, look, we're going to send people in to get a clear report about what's going on. Now, this is one of the most fascinating, fun, interesting books of the entire Bible. I think this is so much fun. You may or may not think it's as fun as I do, but I think it's great. Here's what it says in Numbers chapter 13. It says, when Moses sent them to explore Canaan, he said, go into the hill country. He said, see what the land is like and whether the people who live there are strong or weak or few or many. What kind of land do they live in? Is it good or bad? So he's like doing his due diligence on like, hey, is this going to go well for us if we go in there and take the land? Now, whether do you think people should go take the land? That's a whole different cultural thing. But this is what was going on, right? They're going and they're going to take the land. He's going like, I want you to scout it out. Scout it out and see how we're doing. Now, in Moses' mind, this is what's interesting. This is a scouting report on like a Shohei Ohtani, but in his back pocket, he's going, I know that my guy can strike him out. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of this going like, no matter what we see, God is going to do what God is going to do. Like you see some of this confidence in Moses. The people that he sends in, you don't see that same level of what's going on. In fact, he sends them out and it goes on and it says this. We go to the next. It says, what kind of towns do they live in? Are they unwalled or are they fortified? Like, can we break through this? He said, how's the soil? Is it fertile or poor? Are the trees in it or not? Do your best to bring back some of the fruit from the land so that we can look and evaluate it. Let's kind of see what's going on here. I want a full workup of where we are headed. And so they go, and then it says this. It says they came back, right? It says they came back to Moses and Aaron and the whole Israelite community. Now, again, I think this is so fun. If you kind of picture this, they just gather everybody together and say, look, we're on the verge of what we think God is leading us to. This whole cloud, all this, God is leading us to where we're going. We're on the verge of it. Give us the good report back. And he goes, they came back, the whole Israelite community. And they reported to them and to the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. They're like, look, these are real nice apples. I don't know, that's weird. I don't think it was apples, whatever it was. Like, these are great. They don't even have worms. I don't know. Like, we're excited about the fruit. That's fantastic. Then it goes on and says this. And so they gave Moses this account. But when we went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey, thank you, Jesus, right? And here is its fruit. And then they said this. They go on, if we go to the next one, it says, but the people who live there are powerful. And the cities are fortified and very large. And we even saw descendants of Enoch there, which is like, it's like, this is like, we saw like the Space Jam dudes there. You know what I'm talking about? You guys remember the first Space Jam? The second one. I'm going to talk about that one because Jordan. Where's Josh? Is Josh else in the room? Let's just all acknowledge that Michael Jordan's better. Anyway, so there's a little bit of that. Thank you, Drew. Anyway, so there's a little bit of that. The space, this is not going to go well for us. Look around, look what's going on. They see what's in front of them. And the power that's in front of them, this isn't going to go well. And then you get Caleb who speaks up, who's one of these like core leaders to what's going on. Caleb speaks up and he says this. He says, then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. Can we say this together? We can certainly do it. 1, 2, 3. We can. Certainly. Yeah, you did. See, you can be Caleb. He's looking at all the Israelites people like, here we go. We're going to do it, you know? But then the next verse is what's so telling, right? He goes on and says this. It says, but the men who had gone up with him said this, we can't attack those people because they are stronger than we are. That what's in front of me is impossible. And here's the other side of it. This is what's so fascinating. Even though God had already promised beauty and power and blessing on the other side of their obedience. And this is the part that I would say, you're likely not headed to Canaan to go overtake something and part waters and do that sort of thing. But the truth of the matter is this. There are things that God has promised in all of our lives when it comes to blessing that requires a leap or a step or a movement or a nudge or a shuffle or a jazzercise sort of move. I don't know. Whatever it takes to get there from us. But he's already promised to be present on the other side of our obedience. And this is what you know, and this is what I know. You ready? This is what we all sort of know this. Is that we can go, I'm going to obey, I'm going to obey, I'm going to obey, I'm going to follow. You get all my life, you're going to sing the song, everything's there. And at back here is everything but obedience in this thing. And what's true about you and what's true about me, this is really just honest. Can I just be honest about it? What's true about you and what's true about me is my head can fight with my heart and find a very logical response to justify my disobedience to what God is calling me to do. I am a freaking ninja at that. I know what it's like to say, but, and convince myself away from it. Now, here's what's fascinating. If you've never read this, you should go read these passages in Exodus and Numbers. It's just so beautiful, so powerful. What happens next is they make a series of bad decisions in disobedience. And some of you didn't know this is kind of the part that goes on. And what happens next? How long were they around there? Do you remember? 40 years. Then they wander for 40 years because of their disobedience. Now, this is the part of the sermon that no pastor likes to talk about, that nobody even likes, right? So this is a really honest part because God is love. We love that God is love. We love that God, gives us things we want and full grace, absolutely. And also, God has a specific plan that he's going to move forward on the earth with or without your obedience. He's just invited you to be a part of it. God is going to do what God is going to do, and he is inviting you to experience it, and you get to choose whether you're a part of it or not. Now, here's the other side of this, and I mean this so lovingly, I really do, is that doesn't mean your whole life falls apart. Actually, I don't know. Sometimes you make decisions, you go, man, you experience consequences for a long period of time. That's true, yeah. But God has set up the world in a way, and the best way I've ever heard it described to me is like, there is a wave or a movement of his spirit moving through the world with redemptive power. And you can jump in that wave and be a part of it. Or you can sit alongside of it and go, look at it go. And walk like, you ever seen somebody walk beside a lazy river? You ever seen this? We used to go to Myrtle Beach when I was a kid, and I'd get in one of those little raft things. I'm talking about. This is me living my best life at 13 years old, by myself in a bathing suit that didn't fully fit. I remember looking up one time, and there was just this guy walking, and I just kept lapping him. You ever done this? It felt so fun. In fact, by the third round, I just started going with my highlighted tips and spiked hair and the whole deal in 2001. You know what I mean? And I thought to myself, I went, it is kind of like that. The wave of the Holy Spirit is moving throughout the world, and God has invited you to be a part of the most powerful, beautiful, amazing story, both for your life and through the redemptive nature of the world. And you choose. Which one are you going to be? And what's hard for most of us, and this is what's so tough, and I say this all the time, is that most of you are pretty self-sufficient and can live a good life. It's just not the life that God has called you to fully live. And you could get to the end of your life and go, I did well because you did well. But you have no idea what you're leaving on the table by not going in fully with God. I put it in my notes, so this, it's probably really blunt, so this way, it's possible to miss the blessing of God because we ignored the power of God, specifically amongst us. What's so funny about our church, I hope I can say this, well, you know what, we're gonna do it. I remember when we were in COVID world and we were living in this tiny little cottage thing, and at the time the bed. So this is, you don't want to know this, but there were 2 bedrooms. It was 500 square feet, and 3 bedrooms actually, 500 square feet. And me and Emily were in different rooms. We just had Eleanor, and so Emily and Eleanor would sleep in the bed because the beds were so small, me and Emily couldn't sleep in the bed together. You know what I'm talking about? So I slept with a kid, and then she slept with a kid, and we did this for a few months. And I remember being in that cottage, and I remember all of the things that I said about church planning. Most of them were about strategy on how to plan a church. And nobody said this out loud, but how to do it slightly better than somebody else. So there was nobody said it quite that way, but that was a little bit of what it was. And I remember I'd sit in some of these meetings, I just get so frustrated. And what I would get so frustrated about is this, that there is a component of what God does in the world that has very little to do with all of this, even though I love all of this, and where we meet and what it looks like and how good things are. There's a component of this where as a church, a community, a group of people decide, am I gonna get in that wave of what God is doing and be involved in the movement of God in my city? And this is what's so fascinating is, and we talked about this a little bit at Vision Builders Night, but the cultural sort of ups and downs and things that we see, those are similar. We've talked about this even recently, every 60 years or so, we see the types of things that we're seeing. It's election week. Everybody's a little butt clenched. Come on, it's a weird week. Everybody's got strong things about it. But what's so fascinating, even in this, and at the guts of all of it is a remnant of people who say, whatever happens out there, or whatever is going on around me, the anchor point isn't my own self-sufficiency. It's not how good I can be. With local churches, it's not how much, how good do we knock it out of the park? It's not those things. It is, are we aligned and in tune with the Spirit of God moving in the world? And are we in that wave riding it fully all in? And this is where I would say what's so funny about our church, and I don't say this lightly, but I would say this. We do a lot of things really great. And most of the things that we do really great will help you grow in your faith, but you will not take the deep dive until you take the deep dive of saying, wherever you call me is where I'm gonna go. Whatever you are speaking to me is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna pause and I'm gonna listen, and I'm not gonna do this as much as, you might be prying it out. I might do one finger at a time, you know what I mean? But you get all of it. And I'm going to follow you. And if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, we start talking about like a Holy Spirit, and the person that invited you feels a little butt clenched right now too, just not this week, but right now. And I get that because it feels weird, but I'll just tell you, like, the weirdness of that is also what drove you to be here. Because the normal things that you're involved in, you didn't come because they invited you because you get a free lunch. Maybe you get a free lunch. I don't know, but you didn't come for that. You came because you're looking for something that's beyond you. And the beautiful truth in this is that Jesus is beyond you. And he's calling us to get into that wave and trust and follow him. Put in my notes, I said this way, God is ultimately calling us or inviting us to partner with him. And this is the hard part. Again, the hard part about this truth is you can choose to partner with him and be in that wave, or you can choose not to. But he invites you to partner with him. And then the other part too that's fascinating is God blesses our obedience, and he doesn't always bless it in the way that you think he's going to, but he always does bless your obedience in some way. And in some way, that's reshaping and shaping your heart. In some ways, it's like freeing you from some of the things that have like kept you down. In some ways, it's just extending your faith in ways that you could never understand. In some ways, it's helping you to see from a totally different perspective and parenting different, or loving your spouse different, or finding a spouse different, right? In a lot of these ways, come on, this is what's so fascinating. Followers of Jesus should be so different at work. It is not that you don't talk about your faith, because I think you should talk about your faith, but there should be something about you when you're in this wave of the Spirit where other people are just like, he's a little different. Oh, he's a little different. What is it? I don't know, but it's good. I don't know, but it's different. You're different. What's that thing? Like, you're not shaking about everything else. You're walking into this week going, there are things that I believe and should happen, but I'm not like so swayed that I'm anchored in something that's bigger than this. Like, there's these things about you that's different, right? God blesses your obedience, and then the last one is this, and this is really hard. I tried to say this very specifically. God doesn't promise to bless our disobedience either. This is a harder truth, and again, a lot of people don't like to talk about this. When you are disobedient, God often redeems it in ways where it feels like a blessing on the other side. You'll hear people tell this story, like, I did this thing, I know that I shouldn't have done it, and then I got to the other side of it, but look what God did to fix that thing on the other side. Those are amazing and powerful and beautiful stories. And also, he doesn't promise to do that, and he doesn't always do it that way. And here's how you know that. Are you ready? Because you've met somebody who was disobedient to the way of Jesus, experienced the consequences of it, and then lived in the consequences of their sin. So a lot of what we talk about, and again, this is going, how am I going to be so obedient to Jesus here that I don't experience the regret on the other side of what that disobedience looks like? And his grace is for you, but this is the hard part. He doesn't always promise to fix everything that you disobeyed him in the ways that you think he should. And you're like, man, that feels like scary preacher, fire and brimstone, stuff. Yeah. You know why? In the same way that I don't want my kid to touch a stove because he burns his hand, that Oliver ripped out of my hand the other day and just to the street. And I have a dad voice, and it sounds a little bit like, I don't know, it's not great. It doesn't sound like throwing up, but it does sound, aggressive, Because I love him so much that I don't want him to experience that. And the other side of this is true, and this is a parent too. There are times where I look at my kids, and they go, I don't want to do it your way. And I say, okay. And you step back and you let them do it their way. and they experience it on the other side, and you go, I'm going to be there with you on the other side. But that's what happens when you hit your sister. She hits you back and she wins. You know what I mean? Like there's a little bit of that. I'm kidding. But there's that. And I'll say most of us have figured this out in a lot of different areas. But generosity is one of the areas that's very difficult for most of us to navigate this from. I put in my notes to say this way. I said that God moves in power with those whose posture is submission and obedience. And those who experience this wave and this move and this lazy river, but on steroids kind of thing with God, are those who come to him and say, I might disagree, but I'm going to obey. It hurts me to submit in the moment because I don't know if you're going to follow up on the other side, even though my brain tells me you probably will, but I'm going to obey. I'm going to predetermine to follow you my life. So I put two statements on the next slide. The first one is the one that I kind of want to bother you, if I'm really honest, to bother you just a little bit, and that's this. That if you want to see God move, then you must choose to follow his lead. God is moving around you, and he is inviting you to be a part of it, and you can miss it. Follow his lead. I read this. I didn't read it. By reading it, I mean I saw it on TikTok. I was like flipping through, and it was, bunkers, because election week. Anyway, I was kidding. And it was John Mayer, because John Mayer. And then it was this guy, and he said this. He said, if you want to know how to experience the voice of God in your life, so most of us will pray a prayer and then sit and wait and go, He said, one of the most powerful things you can do is to write it. Your response, and I'm going to say this, and then what God's response is to you back. You go, well, what if that's just me? Ooh, I think God can handle that too, What if that's just what I want? You'll know. And he's like, and if you watch these prayers, they get bigger and they get more clear. And then you weigh what you kind of wrote down against what Scripture teaches. Now, this feels like kind of mystical kind of stuff, but I'll just say this. It was just funny. So I sat there on TikTok at 1 a.m. going, it's you. And then I did it the next day. I was like, well, dang. He was right. Well, you don't know how to hear the voice of God because you haven't stopped to listen to what God is saying. And you go well, if it's my thoughts or his thoughts, and if it seems to be my thoughts, I'm just not going to listen. But if God can speak through a donkey, he can speak through your heart too and your mind. New Testament references. There's a little bit of this where I go he can speak to you. Are you listening? And will you follow his lead? The second part about this is my job is to align with God and trust and follow. No matter what. And every time, and this is we talk about this in our home a lot. Delayed obedience is disobedience. Disobedience is disobedience. And then pretending that it didn't happen is disobedience. So obey. So when it comes to this generosity component, what we're going to do is I'm going to tell you out the gate what I believe that God has already said about this when it comes to our heart. First thing is this, that everything God has given us is his. I said this earlier, we are stewards, not owners. And then this is what's so fascinating about the local church. This is true of the New Testament church as well. We make a difference not just by ourselves, but we make a difference together. We choose to be a community that doesn't just gather, but we lock arms together to do something extraordinary together and follow the Spirit's movement in our city, united as one. And so there's two questions that I really want, and I've said versions of this for the last 3 weeks, that I want to just get in your spirit and bother you. And the question is what do you want to do through me? And the second one is God, what do you want to do through us? What do you want to do through me? And then what do you want to do through us as a church? So I'm going to give you a very practical thing about what this looks like for us as a church, all right? If you call Nuvo your church, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes is for you. So if we're Facebook official, It slipped out the other day, and somebody's like, where do you go to church? It's like, I am Nuevo. And they're like, Nuevo? You're like, Nuevo, it's a different thing. There's a little bit of that, like if you would say Nuevo is your church, what I'm gonna challenge you to do is two things. And I'm gonna explain these two things together, and that's this. I want you to have a generosity plan when it comes to supporting the local church. And then we're gonna talk about year-end giving. And so I'm gonna tell you what we're gonna do with these two sort of things. And I'm gonna call those of you who call Nuevo home to these two places. First is I'm gonna call you to have a plan for generosity to a local church. And if this is your local church, I think you should have a plan of generosity here. And then what we're gonna do is we're gonna do a year-end giving offering this year. And if you mark those year-end giving offerings, so above your plan of giving, but if you mark those year-end giving offerings to go to that, 100% of that's gonna go to missions partners and what we're doing globally and locally in missions ways. So I'm gonna walk you through this, right? But I might have said this. Every person that calls Nuevo home, this is our prayer, would take a step in faith financially. And here's why I say step in faith. You ready? Because it's a step in faith. You don't give and it not be a step in faith. And here's how I know for you, and this is how you know for you if it's a step in faith. You ready? You can pick a dollar amount that makes you go, like that. That's the noise I make. You know what I mean? Like that you give in faith. And in faith means this, that I'm going to give and trust that God shows up in a way on the other side of it, right? If you're not giving in a way that causes you to go, if you don't show up, I'm gonna feel like it's a sacrifice. That's not sacrificial giving, right? Give me a great example, right? I talk about the year-end giving thing, giving towards missions. You have all of the stuff you're about to buy in November and December. This is what sacrificial giving is. You could say, I'm going to give a year-end gift to our church and say yes to everything else that I was planning on doing. That is not sacrificial giving. That is you giving comfortably, but not sacrificially. So I'm gonna ask you to give sacrificially, which means I'm gonna ask you to say no to something. We're gonna do this with our kids. I'll tell you more about that too. But every person that calls Nuevo home would take a step financially. So for some of you, and this is kind of the on-ramp for this, is what it looks like. Some of you, it's gonna be like the first time that you've like actually started giving. Anything beyond you. And I would say this is what, and I mean this wholeheartedly, that's great. Pick what that is and then give. For some of you, it's like the first step of giving is the best giving, but we're gonna ask you to give. Second one is this, for those of you who've been followers of Jesus for a long time, ready? I'm gonna ask you to begin tithing. Now, there are all sorts of fun debates on, is tithing New Testament, is it an Old Testament principle, what does it mean? I almost wanted to do a whole talk on that, but I'm not, but I'll say this. I'd say, how do I say this well? This is gonna feel overly blunt. When you were a kid, my mom used to pay me $10 in ones because I grew up with this principle. And here's what she would do. She'd sit me down. Here's what she'd sit me down. And she'd go, let me tell you about what this looks like. And she'd lay out all $10 on a table. This is my home growing up. And she'd go, you get to give $1 back to God. And I was like, great, awesome, woohoo. That dollar, she'd go here, I'd put it on my little, we had the pass the plates when I was a kid, which would be big old, anyway, you care about that. That pass plate, I'd give it on Sundays. And then she'd look at me, she'd go, and God said you get to keep 9 of them. I was like, woohoo, that's amazing. 9 out of 10? He said I get to keep 9 out of 10. That's fantastic. All right, I'd be so excited. I'd go buy an action figure, right? And then that $10 turned to $100. And so I used to do this when I was a kid. I'd get it in tens. Right? At the bank, when you have to go to the bank to get money. Anyway, so I'd do this sort of thing, and I'd lay it out. And I'd go, you know what? 90's great, but 100's better. Can I get an amen on that? There's a little bit, yeah, you know what I'm saying? And then something would cost like 100. I'd be like, but I mean, and I would still do it, and I'd do that. But when it turned into thousands, I'll never forget the first time I got $1,000 all at once. I sold all my baseball cards, and I had like $1,000, and I looked at it. And my mom had the same conversation with me. I was in middle school. And she goes, you know, you're going to give some of this away. And I had actually committed to give a lot of it away, more than 10%. Until I laid it out. And I don't know what this is like for you, but when I laid it out, I was like, I committed to give quite a bit of that away. I don't know how much, but. And I remember like the hundreds disappearing from my hand and going, I mean, Jordan 3s, Jordan 4s, Jordan 5. Like I remember feeling this, and I'll just tell you what this was like for me. When I looked at that, the bigger the number, the harder it was to give. Can I just tell you something? The principle of God's stewardship to you did not change because more zeros got added to you. And what you have done and what I've done oftentimes is gone, but if I have more, then I can do more because it feels like a loss because I don't know that he's trustworthy. Now, you don't say the other part out loud. That's just true. That I can do more with 100 than I could do with 90. The problem with that is it's the exact same principle for you in saying this. Now, don't miss it. That I can do more if I work 7 days than I could if I worked 6 and trusted him with the Sabbath. Same principle. Say it this way. Say, I could do more in my own strength than inviting you to bless the gap here. And so here's what I'm going to tell you. And this is just really honest for those of you who've been a follower of Jesus for a long time. Is one of the greatest acts of faith that you're going to have is not going to be for your kids. It's not going to be for your spouse. It's not going to be for your job. It's going to be in deciding if you trust God with this too. And so some of you in the room, I'm going to ask you to start tithing and trusting God with that number. And then the last one is this, and this would say for everybody who currently gives, when you make a plan for your giving this year, I'm going to ask you to reevaluate what you're currently doing through the lens of sacrificial giving and trusting God in the midst of it. So I put in my notes, I said this. Every person that calls Nuvo home, all right, and this is the next one, if we can go to the next one, would make a sacrificial year-end gift to our missions fund. So here's how we're going to structure this. This is really honest, right? If you're looking for the nuts and bolts, there's that piece. This piece is going, I want to make a significant difference in our city and our community. We want to make a significant difference when it comes to church planning, and we want to make a significant difference on the other side of the world. You're going to hear about these three things as we go forward. The other part of this is we want to make a significant difference in our city by being ready when God prompts us to move into a space, right? So what we're going to do is this year-end giving offering is we're going to say we're going to take roots here when God provides the space, and we're going to be ready for it to move and act when it comes. We're going to give to our missions projects, and then we're going to get beyond. So let me put these up here. The first one is this. The spaces, we can go through all three. Missions, and then the last one is this, love local. We want to make a difference in our city. Now, love local and missions are two different things for us. It's say like, hey, benevolence needs pop up. We don't ask, we just act, right? And we're able to just act because you give to those things. So we're going to ask you to give to those things with a missions offering this year. The global and national things that we're a part of, we slice off a portion of what we do and we give to those things. So in 2 weeks, you're going to hear about how we do this with our global partner. It's going to be a really extraordinary day. I don't want you to miss that. We'll tell you how we're helping to bring young girls out of sex trafficking. One of the ways that we do this right now, you don't even know this, every time you drink coffee, we are giving money to that organization to help bring these young girls out of sex trafficking in Nepal. Now, you don't even know that. You just drink coffee. So drink so much more coffee, right? Drink all the coffee. Everybody's like, how do you have 4 cups? Why don't you sleep? But outside of that, we're going to help. That's one of the ways we do it. We also give it other ways. But I'm going to say, I want you to be involved in that and go, we're going to work as a church to be ready for the space that God provides us. We are going to give boldly towards missions and national church planning. And we're going to give specifically to love local and to meet benevolence needs in our community as they come up. So here's what we're going to do. I don't know of a better way to do this, but this is how we're going to do it. If you're on the edge of a row, I'm going to ask you to grab one of these cards. I'm going to ask you to do anything with these cards today except look at it. So this is true. I want you to grab one of the cards, take one down, pass it around. 13 cards in the row. I don't know. I did count. Yeah. Let's just pass one of these cards down. All right. Here's what we're going to do with these cards. You're not going to do anything with it today, right? But on November 17th, here's what we're going to ask you to do. Let's put up the next one. I'm going to show you the card. I'm going to talk you through it a little bit. Can we go, let's go through the next one. We've only done this one other time. Can I tell you, we did this one other time. Can I tell you, I'm going to tell you very briefly, the only other time we did this, I was on a flight back from Dallas. We were not planning on talking about this sort of thing. And got on the plane, it felt like God spoke to me in the most tangible way, says, I want you to call people to give. Not everybody agreed that we should do that. And we came back, we said, we're going to give you a card. We're going to give you 3 weeks to pray about it. And then at the end of that 3 weeks, I want you to make a plan for giving, a plan for year-end giving. That was the first time our church ever stepped up to do that. This is what's the crazy part. We did that then. We lost the building that we were in a few weeks after that. And we were in La Scala 2.5 months later, right? And we had no idea about that stuff. Now, I don't know that in 2.5 months there's going to be a building. That's not what that story is. But I would say this, for our church, this isn't something that's like, oh, it's kind of passive. This is something that feels weighty to our church because we're calling you to do something together, right? So let me tell you about this card. What I want you to do is I want you to take this card. I don't want you to throw it away on your way out. I want you to take it with you, and I want you to pray over this card for the next few weeks, right? I actually do. And if you're married, I want you to pray over it as a couple. And if you've got kids, this is what we're going to do with our kids. We're going to tell our kids about what we're doing. My kids are going to work, and they are going to make money, and they're going to know what it looks like to give back to God. That's how we're going to do this with our family. I'd love for you to do the same thing, right? On the card, there's a couple different things. The first thing is this. I want you to think about what God is calling you to give over the course of the next year, which means when we talk about this, some of you are going to start giving because you're like, hey, this is the first step. Some of you are going, hey, I'm not giving the percentage that I know that God would have me to give, and I want you to think about that, and I want you to move on what he tells you to do. I don't want you to make that decision here. So this is where I'm saying there's no like keyboard that's going to come out and didn't. What did God say right now? Write it down. That's actually not what we're going to do. I want you to get alone. I want you to go eat lunch. I want you to pray about it for a couple of weeks and ask God what he would have you to do. All right? I want you to think about these things. And I want you to put that down, tell you how you're going to do it. And we're going to bring back, we're going to do that in a couple of weeks. The year in giving one is the one that I think is hard for many of us. And I would say this, you're going like, man, I'm going to plan out what I'm giving for the next year. And also I'm going to do a year in giving. Here's what I want you to do. And this is the most simple way I'm going to do it. Most of you have some version of a plan for what you're doing for November and Christmas and all this kind of stuff. I want you to say, God, with all of my plans, what would you have me to say no to so that I could say yes to you in this? And I want you to feel whatever that is and trust him on the other side of it. I want you to give like that. And what we're going to do is you still like love local when you give that sort of year-end gift. We'll push this more as we get towards December and Christmas. We'll say how much we give. But when we do that, and I mean this wholeheartedly, this is one of those things that's going, I'm saying no to something so I can say yes to this so that I can specifically help in one of those three areas, right? That's what that's going to be. And then the other part of this card, which again, if you're a QR code person, this is kind of fun. If not, I'll give you the link. The bottom part is like, this is how you can like set it up to give. I just send you to your phone or wherever that is. That's great. The top one is the one that I'd really like for you to do, and this is one that I'd go, I'd love 100% participation for everybody that attends our church in all of this. But even if you're not going to do all of it, the one thing that I wish I could convince everybody to do was to do this 10-day devotional and to make this a part of your quiet time for the next 10 days, right? Now, they're short because I like short to read things, right? That's not true, I love reading. But I'd say like for you, it's like 500 to 600 words. It's got reflection questions at the end. And for 10 days, I want you to go through this. Now, what we did in the back, and I did this last night because I had these questions. I put appendix. So there's an epilogue, so that's fun because I just couldn't stop writing. So there's an epilogue part. And then I did the appendix 1 and appendix 2. Appendix 1 is this. I think it's the first one, talks about what tithing is and why we believe in that as a church. I'd love for you to read that. And you may go, man, I've got like 20 questions out of that. Fantastic. Would love to talk to you about it. Right? That's great. But for those of you who are like, I don't know about the whole thing, I want you to read through that and engage with it open-handedly. Second appendix talks about what it looks like to like begin the process of giving. And then the last appendix is something that I have been a little curious about. And it is inspired by another church that did this. I am not an overly liturgical person. I'm just not. That's not really my thing. But they have a liturgy of giving that they will repeat together as a point of what they would say is counterformational to their heart when it comes to things that have gripped their heart. And so here's what I'd love for you to do. I'd love for you to do whatever that day's worth of stuff is and go to that last appendix. And I'd love for you to read that liturgy at the end every day as a prayer. And when I say counterformational, what I mean is this. Everything in me, and this is just me, does this to most everything I have so that I can protect it, that it's mine, and take my ball and go home. You can't have it. I'm an only child, so I'm 10 times as worse than everybody else. You know what I mean? Like I got all this. And here's what the liturgy stuff does. Is on a daily basis, it reminds me that going, I'm going to be open-handed. I'm going to remind myself what that is. And so it's a PDF. You're like, dude, I don't have that kind of phone to open that up. That's great. We'll get you a printed copy. For the next 10 days, I'd love for you to engage with it that way. So here's what we're going to do. So we're going to wrap up. I'd love you to take the card. I want you to hold the card just for a second. All right. That's it. I'm going to pray for you. And what I'm going to ask you to do is over the course of the next week, engage with this. So next week, what we're going to do is we'll continue our series. We're going to tell you a little bit about some of our partners. The week after that, Please don't miss. I was like, how do I convince you not to miss? We got baptisms next week. Where's Turquoise at? Turquoise, Turquoise is getting baptized next week, which is amazing too. So we're doing that. And then we're going to be talking about our partner, our global partner. That one is going to be a really powerful day. Don't miss that. And then we come back on the 17th. That's going to be the day. What I'm going to ask you to do is bring your card back. And what we're going to do is we're just going to say, hey, here's what we're going to do as a church. So some of you are like, where do I have to be on the 17th? It's great. All the QR code stuff still works. So it'll be great. So I'd love for you to do that. But I'd say but we're going to come together as a church and say, here's how we're going to navigate the next year when it comes to these things. So love for you to hold your card. Let me pray for you, and then we'll dismiss you. Father, thank you so much for our church. Thank you for what you're doing here, and thank you that we get to be a part of it. As much as the Old Testament sort of stories feel distant, they're not. You still guide us, and you still move, and you still show up in tangible ways, and you are still speaking, and we just ask you would open our eyes and our heart to what it is that you're speaking to us. God, we know that you are doing extraordinary things in the life of our church. And God, we just ask that you would move in our hearts to be faithful to you, and also that you would help us to trust you with abundance. I pray over the next couple of weeks for many people in this room, beyond the financial side of this, that it would actually be something that shapes their faith moving forward. That the things that often grip our hearts around the things that we think that we need, or even just excess, or even just trusting you to be faithful when you said you would be faithful. God, I pray that you would make all of those things clear to us, and that you would move in our hearts over the next few weeks, and that you would help us to trust you. I pray for the people in the room who, when it comes to this, they have been disobedient in the past. God, I pray that you would overwhelm them with the beauty and the power of your grace, and at the same time that you would bring them into a place where they experience the beauty and power of faith moving forward. I pray for the people in the room who are going, I love this place, but I don't know what to think about the whole Christianity thing, but they love it. God, I pray that you would move in their heart, and this would even be something where they would go, I'm not just testing God, but I kind of am. I kind of wanted to see, will you show up for me? God, I pray that you would show up in beautiful and powerful ways for them too. God, we pray for our church. God, we ask that we would be able to do the kinds of things that you've called us to do without hesitation, and that we would follow you boldly into the difference that you want us to make here in Columbus. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.